This is actually a copy of a warning to motorists on a case that I handled. If you, whether as a defense attorney, you look at it, read it. They did change the form. So now, when we talk about what the warning must involve, is that an individual who fails to complete all of the tests will either have, excuse me, if they fail or complete it, will either have a 12-month suspension if in fact they have not had a prior DUI, or statutory summary suspension sustained in last year, 5 years, or if they have had a DUI supervision, or have had a statutory summary suspension remain in effect from a prior DUI arrest. The suspension will be for 3 years. So when the officer reads this, they read it verbatim, and it talks about, as provided in the section 11-500 of the Illinois Vehicle Code, you are a first offender if you've not had a DUI within the last 5 years. This language can be confusing to motorists because they may have had a DUI outside of 5 years. They may have had a prior supervision or a conviction outside of 5 years. That does not apply to the statutory summary suspension on the warning to motorists. So an individual who's had a prior DUI outside of 5 and who has read this still may be eligible for some type of driving relief from the MDDP, the monitoring driving device permit, some type of driving relief pending the criminal case. And confusing to the motorists, they'll come in and say, well, Brick, why does the warning to motorists say 5, that I am eligible, I'm a first timer? It says yes on it. I said, well, that's because you've been outside of 5, you've either had a DUI, or you may have had a DUI or a statutory summary suspension that went into effect, but it was outside of 5. Well, the confusing part of this is people believe then that they are going to then be eligible for another supervision, and they're not. On the other hand, if in fact the motorist takes a blood, breath, or urine, and they are a first-time offender, they're looking at a 6-month statutory summary suspension. And if they're not a first-timer, they've had a prior DUI disposition and or a statutory summary suspension in 5, they're looking at a 1-year statutory summary suspension. So again, on this warning to motorists, if they're not a commercial driver's license, the officer can strike that. If they in fact are under the age of 21, the officer can strike that. When the officer, and also school bus driver, when the officer is complete in reading it verbatim, then the officer signs the document, as here, the officer from Sandwich, puts the police department agency, in this case Sandwich Police Department, the date of the warning, July 22nd, 2012, on the right, the officer's badge or star number, and then at the bottom, where it says time of warning, they give the time. Now, depending on who the police officer is, this time of warning may be when they started it, reading this, or when they completed it. I believe the better procedure, and as a prosecutor, you want to talk to the officer, better procedure would be that when the officer is done reading the document is the time that should be on the form. And then that way it's more consistent, and then they can move on to their observation periods.